Our story begins with someone saying that he believed that even someone like him, whose talents were awakening, would flourish and take root on the battlefield. That way, he could start a new life. Within that new life, he talks about how he would like to be able to create a family, something he desperately longed for. He says he was wrong because it's been a long time since someone made him swing his sword more than 10 times. Suddenly then, one man asks the other if he was the famous Argiri, the talent that flourished on the battlefield. The man then thinks that this guy knew who he was and never imagined that he would be so happy about it. The man stands up, says it's an honor to be recognized, and calls the other Duke Termian. They were in Drenic, Herring Empire. The Duke then asks if he knew his name, and Argiri replies that yes, he was one of the 6 extra-class knights of the Empire of Alteon. Just one day on the battlefield was enough to feel the weight of a black wave, and that man was from the Empire of Alteon. Termion. The Duke asks if Argiri faced him, even though he knew who he was. He replies that it would be a shame to end his talent prematurely, and asks if the boy had any intention of surrendering. The boy replies that, of course not, as he was born on the battlefield and would die on the battlefield. So the boy stands up again. The man comments that, despite his words, he could clearly see the regret in the boy's eyes. He says that the boy would have been a good rival if he could have grown up a bit more. But if that was the boy's wish, he hoped that in his next life, he could say goodbye to his regrets. So the two start fighting again. It is said that the war between the Empire of Drenic and the Empire of Alteon lasted many years. Argiri's mother was a young widow, a refugee from the war, who left him alone in the chaotic world when he was still young. In his last breath, it was obvious what would happen to this war orphan. He says that he lived a life solely for his own survival, doing whatever was necessary to get by. After turning 14, he was sent to his first battlefield. In this bloody setting, his talents awoke. He says that the mana core in his heart elevated his movements and senses to a level unmatched by those before him. A person then called Commander Argiri and said that they intended to recommend him for the next special knight appointment. After surpassing 3 mana cores and becoming a quad core with 4 cores, Argiri asked to join the Empire's 5 extra-class knights, and that wouldn't be impossible. He says that he has finally acquired the opportunity he has always wanted in his life. After that war, he could finally find peace after a tiring life. The boy continued fighting in the war, killing soldiers, and thought he was about to get everything he wanted. Suddenly, however, a man appears in the middle of the war and attacks him. He says it's a shame because he wanted to reach much higher. The man hits him full on, making him spit blood, and the boy thinks that all he wanted was to start a family. Thrown away with a single blow, he falls to the ground, almost dying, saying that his dream has been slowly crushed by fate. He thought it was all over, but suddenly, in the middle of the darkness, he saw a light and heard a voice saying that the little Dane had finally woken up. Another voice said that he was a good boy, and that he wasn't even crying. The boy, confused, wonders what's going on. Finally, he opens his eyes, and the person talking to him comments that his eyes were clear and beautiful, and that they were sure that this child was a gift from God. Then we discover that the protagonist, who had died in battle, has been reincarnated as a baby. The protagonist wonders what they meant by a child and why they were saying that to him. The man takes him in his arms and tells him that he should become a fantastic spearman and follow in his father's footsteps. He wonders what the man meant by father, and the man's name was Arkan Sog. However, the blonde woman next to him, called Lily Sog, slaps his hand, saying that their youngest son would become a fantastic assassin. The protagonist, Aiton Mudd, observes his parents arguing about his future. Arkan argues that it was horrible to turn their youngest son into an assassin because a man should use a spear, which is the most beautiful and complete martial art. Lily, annoyed, replied that an assassin was better because he could sneak around in the dark, murder his targets, and escape unnoticed, which she thought was much cooler. Aiton comments that this is exactly what had happened to him. He thought he would meet his end, but ended up being reincarnated, and, to his amazement, in the Empire of Alteon, his enemy, as the youngest son of a certain count. His parents kept arguing about what he would be in the future, so they came to a consensus. He would be both. However, the woman insists that she's sure Danny will become a murderer. The protagonist comments that his current parents are these two crazy people who are in the middle of a heated debate about his future. He also says that he's sure that, as he was born in the last years of their lives, his parents want him to follow even more in their footsteps. Suddenly, the man who was controlling the carriage announces that they have arrived. His father then asks Lily to please hold his hand, and she asks asks what the members of the castle would think if they saw this. He replies that he was only trying to hold his wife's hand, and that it didn't matter. He then asks his wife to be very careful in that place. Danny, our protagonist, comments that his eyes were already burning from seeing the scene. Suddenly, he looked around and began to be very surprised by the place. Lily observes and says that it looked like her son was very happy to be back home, as he was even smiling. Denny comments that if the house were that size, it would be much easier for his talents to spread and take wing, easier than he imagined. 2 months passed, and Lily commented that the little Dane could now babble. Denny realized that he was already babbling, something new for both sides. He comments that there were few opportunities to meet young children, due to the time he spent on the battlefield. The few children he saw were wrapped in bandages, crying because they had nowhere to go. Many cried for their parents and slowly succumbed to hunger and despair. In comparison, the Sog home was a wealthy one, and he was sure he wouldn't starve to death there. Suddenly, his father burst into the room, holding a spear, and presents the weapon to his son for the first time. Danny thinks that this crazy man was his father, the strongest spearman in the extra class of the Empire of Ingris. Despite his appearance, he was a warrior hero, known as the Blue Whirlwind. Lily is furious and asks him how he can enter a child's room with something so sharp. Scared, he replies that he just wanted to show his son the spear. Lily insists that she had already said that it was too early for the boy's education. The father replies that his mother was the best assassin in the Empire, called Lily Sog. She angrily says that if he continues to act like this, she will teach her son the basics of stealth while he is still young. Danny comments that his mother, despite being an assassin, had a louder voice than he expected. His father replies that everyone used to do that nowadays, like in the famous magic house, where a staff is placed next to the child as soon as it is born. He then asks if a spear was now an employee, since it was a dangerous weapon. Denny thinks that his family was very harmonious, and the reason his parents attached so much importance to his future was because his 2 older sisters chose careers that had nothing to do with spears or murder. Changing scenes, Danny is lying on a crib and his 2 sisters are next to him. One of them comments that if he continues like this, his cheeks will get fuller. That long-haired little girl's name was Arabella Sog. Due to her magical talent, Arabella followed the path of a mage from a very young age, and by the age of 12, she was already a Class 3 Shen mage, the highest class for a mage being 9 Shen, which made her a genius. She then asked her little brother if he would like to learn magic with her, as she was bored of learning on her own. All he could think of was asking her to stop poking his face. Her other sister was called Clara Sog, and she commented that summoning was also a good way to go. It is said that Clara also had a monstrous talent for summoning, achieving her first summon at the age of 7. Now she could summon 2 creatures at the same time. Arabella then commented that her brother was very cute, but Clara didn't seem very happy. Danny thinks that, at first, he thought Clara didn't like him, but realizes that it was more of a typical big sister jealousy. He comments that, at that moment, Clara was being less careful with him than before. Clara touches his nose and asks how he could be so soft like that. She comments that it would be great fun if he also had a talent for summoning, and that she could teach him in the future. Danny then thinks that everyone wanted to teach him their specialties. His father, an extra-class spearman, his mother, a former assassin who almost killed the Emperor in the past, his older sister, a genius mage, and his other sister, a prodigy summoner. Count Sog's house was perfectly noble, and Danny comments that it was the kind of family he had always imagined. He then wonders if it still makes sense to seek revenge in his new life. Although his previous death left him with regrets, he says it would be funny to talk about revenge against someone who fought fairly with him. So all his relatives were anxious to know what line of work he was going to pursue. Danny thought that he had always hoped to have a family, and that he was very happy to have been born there. After all, who wouldn't want to be born into a wealthy family, right? Changing the scene, it is said that there is a special ceremony at Casa Sog, the choosing ceremony, held when a child in the family turns 1 year old. Many objects are placed in front of the child, and people try to predict its future by the object it grasps. Everyone was saying that today was young Master Danny's first birthday, and they could hardly believe that he was already a year old. Time really was flying by. One man mentioned that the other girls had become a mage and a summoner, so he wondered what young Master Danny would choose. But to find out, everyone had to go to the ceremony. The scene changes to the ceremony, and people comment that the girls have also brought objects this time. They wonder when they grew up so much. Danny's mother then tells him to choose his favorite thing in life, and he begins to wonder what he would do at that moment, since everyone must have been waiting for him to choose the object they put on the table. His father thought that his little son probably wouldn't be able to resist the dragon's tail, a spear made from a rare Kirin ore, which, when embedded with mana, became as sharp and heavy as the magical energy applied to it. It was a magical, mystical spear that her father had used all his life. He wanted Danny to take his father's spear. Danny's mother, on the other hand, believes that he is too handsome to be an assassin and would certainly choose the dagger. The name of that weapon was the Horn of Night, created from the ore of Arterio, which can contain all the elements of the world and store different kinds of poisons. Arabella, his sister, says that Danny will become a great magician and follow in his footsteps by going to the academy in the future. The item she brought to the table was her subspace pouch, an object that can only be used by wizards or people with a talent for magic. She told her brother to take her older sister's bag. Clara, his other sister, commented that if Danny became a summoner, she could take him to Dakon and the two of them could fly together. The item she brought was the summoning sign, an item used by summoners to summon creatures based on their talent. She said that this was her dream for her brother. Danny, confused, wonders why this is happening to him, as if he can hear other people's thoughts. He finds it all very problematic, but he knows he can't avoid the situation. Now he starts to think about which object he should pick up for himself. He then starts to crawl, and everyone is very happy. Everyone tries to persuade him to choose the weapon they have brought, believing that he would be much better off with their choices. Suddenly, when Danny approaches the items, everything starts to glow, and he wonders what's going on. Lily, worried, asked her husband what was going on, but he didn't know either. People were amazed, as it seemed that young Master Danny really was a genius. The protagonist thinks that he was a genius in the war, but that in this life, he was on another level. Arabella asks her father what they should do, and if something like this has ever happened before. Her father replied that he couldn't wait. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. They wonder if they need to teach Danny all 4 skills, which surprises everyone. Changing scenes, Danny, now older, is training with his father. His father comments that he was doing very well and had perfectly perfected the technique he had been taught. Danny thanks his father, and we discover that he is now 7 years old. The father comments that he is an incredible boy, as expected of his son. Suddenly, a man appears bringing something for Danny's father, who comments that it's just in time. Danny asks what that object was, and her father reveals that it was his birthday present. Originally, the present was to be given during the birthday feast, but he decided to give it to her beforehand, as he had been preparing it for 2 years. The present had been commissioned from a renowned craftsman in the capital. The father gives the gift in advance and hands it to Danny. When he picks up the spear, he is delighted with it. The black handle and silver tip make an incredible combination, and the spear feels very light in his hand. His father asks him if he liked the present, and Danny replies that he loved it. The father comments that he asked for the spear to be adjusted to Danny's physique, so that he could get used to it. He then asks Danny if he remembers the difference between a sword and a spear. With the length of a spear, one can effectively restrict the approaching opponent. Danny replies that, with close contact, the spear has an efficient area attack. Her father agrees, saying that this is correct. However, when it reaches a certain level, it will be much more difficult to use than a sword, and that was the fundamental problem with a spear. In order to attack the opponent, it is necessary to keep a minimum distance, so he really couldn't get too close to his opponents. Every weapon has pros and cons. Even swords, which are called perfect arts, become weak in certain situations. Dennett says he'll keep all this in mind, and his father comments that, since he has a new spear, he'll show him something amazing. Dennett wonders if that was the magical power of a former high-class spearman, since even the magical power his father emitted was very heavy. His father then conjures up an attack with the spear, and Danny is impressed by the power. His father explains that the reason the space distorted was because he had emitted magical power into his body while exerting himself with the spear, a technique that uses the characteristic of a core, which concentrates magical power in a specific place. Danny replies that he heard his sisters say that humans can go beyond their physical limits, and that as the number of cores increases, so does the limit. He recalls that, in his past life, he had a quad core. His father, smiling, agrees and says that Danny has really studied hard. He reveals that he has 6 mana cores, which surprises Danny. The boy comments that if he hadn't died in his past life, he might have achieved this too. His father then asks why Danny doesn't try the same technique with his new spear. He asks the boy to relax his mind, forget everything he was thinking at the time, and simply thrust the spear. Danny agrees and reflects that, in his past life, he had no interest in spears, since his talent for swords made him use them as his main weapon, relegating the spear to a secondary role. However, now he decides to give it his best shot. Danny begins to concentrate with the spear in his hands, and his father notes that he has good posture, pointing out that it took him 7 years to master the technique. With Danny's talents, he wonders if the boy can do it. Suddenly, Danny manages to do what his father asked, leaving him very surprised. Incredulous, his father asks him how he managed to do it, clearly impressed. Danny replies that the moment he pushed the spear, he concentrated all his magical power in a single point and infused it into the tip of the spear. When the magical power reached the tip, he cut off the flow. The father asks if Danny really used his magic power and then interrupted the flow, and if he managed to form a mana core. Danny confirms, saying that while reading a book on creating mana cores, he tried the technique and succeeded. In fact, Danny thinks that he formed the core while he was breathing mana. Her father then comments that forming a mana core just by reading a book proves that Danny is a true genius, born in their home. He has always suspected this since Danny was little, but now he is sure. The father tells his son that one day he will become an extraordinary warrior. However, Danny believes that there will be more surprises for his father in the future. The father is still wondering whether his son will become a wizard, spearman, assassin, or summoner. The scene shifts to the 7th birthday of Danny Soger, the youngest of the Sogi's family, at a very lavish party. Suddenly, Duke Bolt appears and greets Arkin, commenting that it's been a long time since they last saw each other. Arkin asked if everything was all right with him, and the Duke said there was no need for formalities. This man was B. Termion, the greatest of the house of the Alteon Empire and the head of the Duchy of Termion. Arkin replies that many people were watching, so it would be less formal later. The Duke encourages him to do as he sees fit and asks where Arkin's son is. Arkin then calls his son to greet Duke Termion. The protagonist has some bitter memories of that Duke. The Duke asks if that boy was Daniel, the son who was always praised. The protagonist introduces himself as Danny Soger. Daniel thinks he couldn't help but feel angry at seeing the Duke again, but says it was an honor to meet him. The Duke comments that Arkin's son seemed very confident and that he didn't need to worry about him. Suddenly, a little girl appeared and greeted everyone. Her name was Layla Termion, the youngest daughter of the Duchy of Termion. She introduced herself and said it was an honor to meet everyone. Changing the scene, Arkin asks the Duke about the Baroness. He replies that they were looking into all possible methods, but had yet to make any significant progress. Ark then says that he did everything in search of approval, but he's sure it will get better. He also mentions that if he suddenly disappears, his friend should understand that this means he used the scroll to return to the capital quickly. However, he asks where Danny is, as she seemed like a very spirited child, and wanted to talk to him for a while. Arkin replied that he was going to ask the same thing, since he hadn't seen Miss Layla either. Suddenly, they look out of the window and see the two of them talking. Arkin comments that the party seemed very boring for the two children. Layla then says that she didn't know why she always followed her father everywhere, but that now she was happy to have followed him. She thought that Danny looked even more beautiful in the moonlight. He replies that he's very happy to hear that, and that their territory was a nice, peaceful place. Layla agrees and comments that there is always something going on in Termion's territory. She explains that the nobles go to prostrate themselves before her father every day, and that sometimes even the imperial family shows up. When this happens, she has to greet them in her dress, something she really hates. Layla then says that she prefers to dress simply and use a sword. Danny is surprised to learn that she is a swordsman. She asks him what he likes, and he replies that he likes both swords and spears. He adds that the place was just as lively as the capital. Layla, surprised to hear that he was training with a spear, remembers that Count Soger's nickname was Blue Whirlwind, and that she had often heard from her father how incredible he was. She then asks if Danny was trying to get into the academy. He replied that he wasn't, since his training with the spear wasn't aimed at that. She wonders why he isn't looking for the academy, as training and joining the academy was an obvious choice, albeit an extremely difficult one. Danny replies that he is training to do even better when he is admitted to the academy. She then asks what he would do if he didn't manage to apply in time, and he replies that he would simply try again, and if he failed again, he would believe that that it wasn't his path. Layla, surprised, says she couldn't believe it. Danny asks if she wasn't afraid of disappointing the members of her house, and she replies that she wasn't particularly. Layla comments that she feels very jealous of him, since in her house failure was unacceptable. He asks her to forget what she was saying, and Danny reflects that she didn't know any nobles who worried about such things. He asks her why she thought that, as it seemed that she wasn't doing well. She then asks him to take a look at her swordsmanship. Danny agrees to take a look, but only a little. Layla gets excited and asks where the training camp was. He asks her to follow him, and wonders if everything will be all right. When they arrive at the training ground, Layla demonstrates her sword techniques, performing several good moves. Danny is impressed by the fluidity of her attacks and defenses, as well as her excellent timing. However, after a while, she starts to lose her breath. Layla asks how it was, and Danny replies that it was fantastic and great to see her fighting. She then questions whether he was telling the truth. Danny wonders if he should be honest with her, but decides to answer yes, although he noticed that, from the third shape onwards, she was taking one step too far, which made the next shapes look a bit off. Layla looks startled, and Danny wonders if he was too direct with her, which really shouldn't have happened. He apologizes, saying that it had been a long time since he had seen a swordswoman like her. Layla says it's all right, that it really happened, and that it was the piece of the puzzle she was missing. Suddenly, she runs up and hugs Danny, thanking him for helping her. He, surprised, asks why she was doing that. Layla replies that he had a real eye for spotting what she was doing wrong. She thanks him, saying she'll remember that. Danny comments that she was choking him and asks if she could put her sword away. Layla apologizes for this, and he explains that her hug surprised him, as it was a very sudden action. Suddenly, some people arrive, calling out to them. Layla says that it seems they were looking for them, and Danny comments that they had to go back. The people who were looking for them ask where they are, since they've been looking for them everywhere. Changing scenes, Danny's mother sincerely congratulates her son on his 7th birthday, and also on his first mana core. He thanks his parents, then finally opens his present. Inside the box was a brooch with the family crest, similar to the one his sisters wore. His mother, smiling, asked Danny to keep the brooch, as it would now serve to prove his status and honor. Everyone then congratulated young Master Danny, and he finally earned the name Sojiz. He will certainly grow up to be a good man, just like the Count. Danny says it was the first time he had received such warm applause. Suddenly, they felt an absurd tremor, and began to wonder what was going on, if it was an enemy invasion. Danny asked his father what was going on, and he asked his son to stay calm, because it was nothing to worry about. His father commented that it was starting all over again, and that he hoped to have some peace of mind that day. Danny's mother then asks his father if he knows what's going on, and he says he can't believe it. Suddenly, a gigantic light appears on the ceiling, and everyone wonders what it was. Shortly afterwards, Danny's sister falls from above, and asks if someone could tell her the time, and if her older sister isn't late. Everyone is amazed to realize that it was Arabella. They wonder if the little lady had just used teleportation magic. People comment that they heard she needed at least 5 chains to open the small gate, and that she was certainly a genius. Danny comments that his sister was very loud and flashy. Suddenly, someone looks out of the window and sees a monster in the sky, claiming it was a wyvern. It was Lady Claire, who says she was a little late. People comment that they heard she was a genius summoner, and wonder how she could control a wyvern at only 16. Arabella then asks if Claire was really there, and she confirms it. The two sisters say happy birthday to their little brother Danny, and give him his presents. He thanks his older sisters for coming over to congratulate him on his birthday. Arabella says that of course they did, but now he should open his present because she was sure he would love it. Their father comments that although the two have only given one birthday letter, they have prepared special presents for their little brother. When Danny opens the first present, he sees that it's a ring, and wonders if it's a dimensional bag. Arabella confirms and explains that she designed the ring herself, using the most powerful subspace magic made by her teacher. Danny thanks his sister, and reflects on how difficult it is to imbue subspace magic into an item. Arabella asks to put the ring on him, and Danny thinks that designing an artifact capable of containing this magic is even more difficult. Arabella explains that she has applied a genetic code to the ring, so that no one but Danny can wear it, and that it was the only ring like this in the world. Danny's mother approaches and, judging by the small surge of mana she feels, comments that Arabella must have used high-quality magic stones. She explains to Danny that if he imbues the ring with a little mana, he'll be able to create subspace, so he won't have to open and close a bag for the rest of his life. Danny comments that he didn't deserve something so valuable, and thanks his older sister. He reflects that this type of item is only worn by rich people, such as as noble commanders or magicians, and that he never imagined he would have one in his life. Arabella also mentions that the ring will grow as he gets older, so there's no need to worry. Suddenly, the ring begins to emit an aura, and Arabella wonders if Danny has managed to open a subspace even faster than she has, and praises her brother for being really amazing, perhaps even with a mana core in a circle. Claire then asks Danny to open his present too. He says it's fine and thanks her. When he opens the present, he sees that there's an egg inside, and everyone is confused. Danny asks why he got an egg, and Claire explains that it wasn't just an egg, and that he should be very careful with it. Danny asks what it was, and Claire whispers that it was something very special, that she was trying to summon a Darren, but she doesn't know what will come out of the egg. She comments that even if she doesn't know, the egg is extremely precious. Danny agrees, saying that he had heard about it, and that familiars are different from normal summonings, as they remain permanently in the world, unlike ordinary summonings. Claire tells his brother that nobody knows yet, so they should keep it a secret until the egg hatches. Danny replies that everything is fine. Arabella angrily asks what's taking them so long and whispers. Claire then tells Danny that she doesn't know when the egg will hatch, but he must pour mana into it every day, once in the morning and once in the evening, so that the being recognizes Danny as its master. Danny promises that he will do this every day. Danny's mother comments that those presents were really incredible, and asks if it wasn't great that his sisters had finally come back. Danny said yes, because he was enjoying it all. Danny then ends up saying something to the effect that, although he was happy that they had managed to go, even after saying they couldn't, he would like them to at least say hello to their parents. The sisters asked if everything was all right with their father, since they were so focused on giving their brother the present that they hadn't even noticed him. He hugged his daughters, saying that everything was fine with him, and commented that they both looked very healthy. They had come all that way just for their little brother, so they needed to rest. At that moment, Lily was watching Danny, who noticed her gaze and wondered if she was leaving already, and why she looked so lonely like that. It seemed very suspicious indeed. Switching the scene to the Duke, he commented that the girl was even more incredible than he had expected. As you'd expect from the Academy's top magician, she had an enviable talent. The Duke thought that if his two houses could unite, it would give rise to a faction so strong that even the imperial family would have difficulty touching it. So no one could touch his house or his children. He then decides that he should mention the involvement of his eldest sons during today's conversation. Suddenly he hears a sound and wonders if they are in the middle of a training session. He wondered who was training so early in the morning. In fact, it was Danny, and when the Duke went to take a look, he realized that it was the youngest son of the Soja's house. When he saw the boy's movements, he was amazed and commented that they were incredible. Danny's movements and concentration were nothing like those of a 7-year-old. Even his simple stabs were of such high technique that experienced spearmen on the battlefield could learn from him. The Duke wondered how such a thing was possible, remembering rumors about Danny's incredible talent, which manifested itself when he was just a year old. The Duke thought they were just rumors, but now he saw that they were true. He notices that Danny keeps his stance and footwork in a similar way to a swordsman, and can't believe that the boy has learned to be so creative with the sword. Danny then comments that he knew someone was hiding and offers to help him clean the face of whoever it was as soon as he gets out. The Duke thinks that the most important thing of all was that Danny's movements seemed strangely familiar to him, as if he had seen those footsteps somewhere before. The Duke apologizes to Danny, saying that he wasn't trying to spy on him. The boy then asks him why he did it. Danny Sojas, the youngest son of the Soja's house, greets Duke Bolt Termian. The Duke then comments that he was mesmerized by the beautiful sight of the Soja's family's new rising star, and the fact that he was training so early in the morning. He asks for forgiveness for his mistake, and asks if Danny could forgive him. Danny replies that everything is fine, that there was no problem. The Duke thinks that the boy really did have a lot of courage, and, looking at him, notices that his body wasn't shaking, despite the effort he had put into training. The Duke comments that he himself hadn't created a mana core at Danny's age. The Duke praises Danny's spear attacks, saying that they were excellent, and mentions that he has certainly inherited Arkan's talent. He asks if the spear Danny was using was a restraining spear. Danny confirms and explains that the spear was carefully prepared for him by his father, and he is grateful for that. The Duke comments that this was the best answer he could have received. He compares Danny to his own son, who also had excellent skills and manners when he was young, but not on the same level. The Duke begins to consider the idea of a marriage between the families. The Duke then mentions that his daughter, Layla, is also training with swords, and as they are both the same age, they could be good friends when they meet at the academy. Danny replies that, with the Duke's grace, he will ensure a good relationship with her. The Duke appreciates appreciates Danny's sincerity and comments that it seemed he was already bothering him too much with the training, so he says goodbye. However, before he leaves, the Duke mentions that he was curious to know if Danny had ever trained as a swordsman. Danny was worried by the question, thinking that perhaps his bad habits had crept up on him without him realizing it, but he wasn't surprised that the Duke recognized it with just a glance. Danny replies that he hasn't, explaining that he's only read about swordsmanship in textbooks, but hasn't trained yet. However, the Duke finds this very strange and swears that he sensed a similarity to the battlefield in Danny's style. However, he thought that this was impossible, as Danny was still a child. The Duke then comments that he spent a lot of time on that simple walk and says goodbye, saying that he will see Danny again when he goes to say goodbye. Danny replies that everything is fine and that he will wait for that moment. The Duke says that when Danny visits the capital, he should look him up, as he would like to repay the hospitality he received at the Count's castle. The Duke also mentions that he has taken a great interest in Danny and is sure that one day he will go to the capital. Danny thought that was very interesting indeed, and wondered if the Duke remembered him. He reflected that, to defeat someone who had defeated him in the past, just thinking about it made his blood pump faster. Danny decides that if he starts preparing step by step now, he'll be sure to be able to defeat that person. He then thinks about Bolt Termian and is sure that he will defeat him in this life. Changing scenes, the butler told the young master that it was time to leave. Danny asked if Hermann was waiting for him, and he replied that it was his duty to always attend to the needs of the Soga's family. Danny then thought that Hermann should be given some stealth lessons, as he seemed talented enough to be an assassin. Danny asked if everyone was busy at the moment, and Hermann replied that yes, everyone was busy preparing for the second banquet. The other nobles have already started arriving, after all. It would be difficult to keep punctual with 30 noble families arriving on exact dates. Danny then asks about his sisters, and Hermann replies that they just opened a teleportation door together and went to the academy. They said they had no choice but to take the exam in the middle of term. Danny comments that this was really embarrassing and asks Hermann to come back. He was then told that when he had more time, he should take a look at the presents he had received from his sisters. Changing the scene, Danny went to the banquet and chatted to various people. After many hours, he commented that life as a nobleman was very tiring, and his schedule was fuller than usual because of his birthday. At least he could find some solace by resting in the garden. He comments that the gardener had tended the place well, as it looked very beautiful, and he feels a strange sense of peace when he looks at the flowers. He then remembers that his older sister said that flowers contain the most mana in nature. With this in mind, Danny decided that, since he had some time, he should analyze the mana in those flowers. He begins to concentrate, and, as soon as he closes his eyes, he reflects that he has trained as much as he could, but still hasn't had any noticeable development in magic or summoning. He is sure that he needs to concentrate much more on his training, and comments that having too many talents can sometimes be problematic. Suddenly, he noticed the movement of the flowers and realized that one small flower contained a very large flow of mana. If someone could sense nature's flow of mana and make it their own, they could house it in their body and create a magic circle. He comments that the mana affinity in that body was really tremendous, allowing him to see some things that others can only sense as a sixth sense. He then realizes that the mana, which he could only see dimly before, is becoming clearer and clearer to him in this life. As he closes his hand, shards of glass appear, as if he were breaking the air itself, and he wonders what happened at that moment. Suddenly, some boys appear, and one of them comments that he was very bored because his father was busy talking to other nobles, leaving them on the sidelines. He suggests that they should just show their faces and then go back to their room to rest, like they did last time. The younger boy asks his older brother if they were allowed to do this, and the older one replies that, as it wasn't their birthday, they shouldn't worry about it. He also wonders if the young man from the Soja's family would mind something like that. The boys begin to trample the garden, destroying the flowers, and wonder why the garden is so disproportionately large. They then spot Danny, and the younger brother comments that there was someone standing there, wondering if that child had also gotten lost. The older brother, observing the way Danny was dressed, concluded that he was probably a servant, and asked him to take them to the exit. Danny, very angry, orders them to leave immediately, asking them if they can't see what's under their shoes. The older one, surprised, replies that it was all very sudden, and asks why that boy was shouting at them for stepping on the grass. Danny asks why they were destroying a flower bed instead of using the path, and the older man comments that he was being very arrogant for someone so small. He asks if Danny knew who they were, and Danny replies that he did. They were the brutes who were destroying the flower bed. The older man gets angry and grabs Danny by the scruff of the neck, questioning who that servant thought he was talking to, saying that they were the sons of Count Tyron, a guest at the castle. Danny remembers Count Tyron, an annoying nobleman he had defeated on the battlefield, and thinks that, like father, like son. The older man said that even though Danny was an inferior being, he certainly knew House Tyron, which was very famous in the capital, and that they could make someone like Danny disappear without a trace. So he should be careful what he said. Danny thinks that the boy's words haven't affected him, and the older man wonders if he's going mad, because how could a mere servant look at him like that? When the older man raises his hand to hit Danny, the latter quickly headbutts him hard in the face, leaving his younger brother worried. He asks if everything is all right with his older brother, who angrily comments that the boy has gone mad. He realizes that his nose is bleeding profusely and threatens to kill Danny right then and there. Danny, smiling and releasing his aura, says he can go ahead and try it without thinking twice. The older boy then lunges at Danny. However, Danny quickly manages to dodge all the attacks without any difficulty. The boy then comments that he looked like a slippery rat. Danny replies that, looking at his footwork, he definitely wasn't someone who used weapons, so he wonders if he's a mage or summoner. The boy continues to attack Danny, but can't land any blows, and says that the brat was so fast that he couldn't catch him. Danny thinks about his mana flow, something he's seen before. If he could harness that magic at will, then shouldn't he be able to compress that strength into a physical force? Danny decides to test this out, and ends up launching an attack that knocks the boy away. However, Danny is saddened to realize that the flower bed has been completely destroyed. The boy stands up and, surprised, comments that Danny could use magic. He asks who Danny really was. The younger brother, worried, says that something very bad could happen if they continue. The older boy asks him to get out of the way, saying he's going to kill that bastard right now. Suddenly, he starts conjuring his aura, and Danny realizes that he was actually a summoner. The boy summons a wolf, claiming that the creature was his summoning, and that he would show Danny the consequences of messing with a wizard. He reveals that his name is Jaren Tyron, and orders the wolf to tear Danny apart. Danny observes the summoning, and realizes that it was just a simple wolf, much weaker than the summonings of his sister Clara, who could even summon a winter. The boy then orders the wolf to tear Danny's throat out. However, Danny remains calm and full. When the wolf looks directly into Danny's eyes, he immediately stops and turns on his own master. The boys are perplexed, not understanding what has happened to the wolf. Jaren shouts, asking what the wolf was doing, since it was supposed to attack Danny. The younger brother comments that the wolf was betraying its master, and wonders how Danny managed it. Meanwhile, Danny stroked the wolf and commented that he was a good boy. Even Danny didn't understand how it had happened. He thinks, now that he's stopped to think about it, that even his sister Clara's summonings were quite friendly towards him. However, he thought that this was due to blood ties. But in that situation, there was no blood relationship. Danny then thought that perhaps he had a high affinity with summons, but it could also mean that the summoner was losing control over his creature. Jaron, confused, commented that it didn't make sense, asking how a summoner could betray its master. Danny asked the boy if he wanted to continue the fight. Jaron's younger brother says that they've lost and that they should leave, but Jaron angrily tells his brother to be quiet. Jaron tries to cancel the invocation at that moment, but realizes that his younger brother was so terrified that he had wet his pants. He comments that it was really embarrassing. Danny, making fun of the situation, sarcastically said that the bathroom was in the basement of the main castle. Jaron, embarrassed, picked up his younger brother and, as he left, told Danny to wait for him, as he would be back to continue the fight. Danny, for his part, only thinks that Jaren could at least take the invocation away. Changing scene, it was almost sunset, and Danny reflected that it was all very simple. Just as his sister Clara had taught him, he had severed the link between Jaron and the wolf, carefully replacing that magic with his own. The wolf, now called GP, became his summon. He thought it was surprising to succeed in a real summoning without having done much, just because of his high affinity with magical creatures. Suddenly, Danny hears a man's voice asking if it was that brat who had beaten him. The boy who had beaten Danny confirms it, saying it was that bastard. Danny thought the situation was getting more and more absurd. The fat man introduced himself as Tyron Morgant, the head of Count Tyron's family, one of the capital's great nobles. He asks if Danny is the brat who left his son's face like that and forced the summoner to turn against him. Danny confirms it, saying that it really was him. Seeing Tyron Morgant, Danny thinks he looks fatter than the time he captured him as a prisoner. He reflects that peace can be a double-edged sword. Morgan says that, as a guest, he had planned to spend the time in peace, but that was something he couldn't ignore at all. He asks Danny why he was in such an isolated place, and orders him to reveal his identity. Danny replies that his name is Danis Soges, the youngest son of Arkan Soges, Lord of the South and head of Count Soge's family. At that moment, the two of them are surprised, wondering if that brat really is Danny Soges. Morgant remembers that he was taken prisoner because of that guy, Arkan Soges, and reflects that, despite having conquered nothing during the war, Arkan maneuvered the situation in his favor so that the Count would be held responsible and used this as a pretext to demand mining rights. He thinks that the nobles who despised him are now bowing down to him. The man then asked him if he was the birthday boy, Danny, and he said yes. However, the man could only think that the boy was very arrogant. He reflected that he hadn't come from the remaining land of the South just to celebrate that boy's birthday. Otaro then asked him what he planned to do about it, since Danny had injured his son, a guest he himself had invited, and stolen his summons, which was actually a serious crime. The man comments that he is going to speak to Count Soger personally to resolve the matter, and that Danny could learn the consequences of this in practice. Danny then says that, first and foremost, he expects an apology. Everyone is surprised and wonders what he meant by that, thinking that the boy was being very reckless. Danny confirms that this is exactly what happened. Although he hit his son on the nose and hurt him, he was also threatened and only defended himself. What's more, he didn't steal the boy's summoning. The wolf simply chose to follow him. The boy then claims that there was no chance of the wolf doing that and tells his father that Danny was lying. Otaro thinks he's heard that the second daughter of the family was a genius summoner, which explains the possibility that Danny learned to cut a link by force. The man then says that, even if what Danny said was true, he was still sorry for the loss of his summoning, but didn't understand why Danny would demand an apology. Danny reaffirms that he was right. The boy wondered who Danny thought he was to act like that, and that he was very arrogant to answer the elders like that. Otaro reflected that the mere fact that he was bothering with that boy was giving him a headache. The man then says it's all right, that he won't scold Danny for long. He's going to talk to his parents-in-law and see what they have to say about what happened. Danny thought that the man seemed anxious to get it over with. Suddenly, Danny's father appears, asking if they were looking for him. Everyone is shocked to see him, as Duke Termion was also with him. The boy explains that he got lost in the garden with his younger brother and asked Otaro's son to guide him back. So everyone continues talking. Danny reflects that his father was very exemplary and cared deeply for his family, but was also not prejudiced against any side. Even with conflicts, he was able to see right from wrong. The boy then tells Danny's father that he was hit on the nose and that Danny used a strange technique to make fun of him. What's more, to scare him, he activated his summoning, and Danny stole his wolf, attacking him again. Danny, seeing the blatant lies, said he was looking forward to seeing what he would say next. Otaro then asks Count Soger if he would give his son a scolding, as stealing someone else's summoning was unacceptable and could not be overlooked. Workington, however, comments that they can't just hear one side of the story, and that he would like to hear Danny's side of the story before assessing the whole situation. If they were concerned about impartiality, he suggested that Duke Termion should also give his opinion. The Duke replies that if they need him, he'll try to help resolve the situation. Otaro, however, thinks that Termion's involvement would only complicate things further, and begins to get a bad feeling. Danny's father then asks him to explain the situation. Danny thinks that if he just tells him what happened, that would be enough. Danny begins by saying that, although some of the things said by Otaro's son were true, what happened was a little different. The boys were deliberately stepping on the flowers that had been so carefully cultivated in the garden. He asked them to stop, but it was they who got angry and grabbed someone by the collar, not him. The boy accuses Danny of lying, but his father asks him to continue. Danny continues, saying that he clearly heard when the boy summoned his wolf, and the order was to kill him on the spot. He reinforces that he didn't steal the summoning, as the wolf chose him and approached him on its own. The Duke then thinks it's impressive that a child of only 7 has such an extensive vocabulary. Danny reaffirms that he never stole the invocation. Otaro, indignant, says that this is absurd, as it is impossible for a summon to submit to someone other than its summoner, and accuses Danny of using some secret technique. Danny, however, says that he wasn't using anything, he just has an innate affinity with summons. He explains that if a summoner doesn't have a strong enough connection with their master, they can submit to someone else with a greater affinity, like him. Otaro retorts that this is nonsense. Arkan asks if it was really possible, and Danny confirms that it was. Otaro, smiling, asked if Danny was serious, finding it impossible to believe his words, since the stories told were completely different. If they were so different, then one of them was probably a lie. The Duke suggests that the situation could be resolved with a simple invocation as proof. Otaro thinks that, of all the time they've been talking, the Duke has only interrupted now. Arkan then asks his son if he could prove what he was saying, and Danny says yes. Tyron's son starts to get worried as he can't summon his wolf again. Everyone wondered why it was taking him so long to summon his wolf. The boy replied that there was something wrong because he couldn't summon it. His father asks how he, who summons the wolf several times a day, suddenly couldn't do it. Danny thought that the connection between them had already been severed, so it was clear that the boy could no longer summon the wolf. Danny asks his father if he can summon the wolf now, and he says that he needs a sign, something that only he possesses. The boy then questions what Danny meant by that, asking if it was the sign he was referring to. Tyron says he doesn't believe what Danny is saying and refuses to give the sign, thinking it's all nonsense. Even if someone used a unique code from another summoner, he says it wouldn't make any difference. Ark then says that, as he himself said, even if he uses a signal, it shouldn't work. So, what would be wrong with trying? He asks if that wouldn't prove that his words are true. Otaro thinks that he wasn't wrong, and at that moment, he couldn't refuse the offer. He asks his son to give Danny his code. It is said that a summoning sign has a code unique to the summoner engraved on it. Normally, no one is able to use it, but with that wolf the boy summoned, imbued with his mana, the summoning sign was just a vehicle. He thinks that the wolf has already connected with Danny, and so will answer his call. Danny finally manages to summon that wolf. The boy wonders how it was possible, and his father says that it really was impossible. The Duke then says that the boy was incredible, and wonders if he didn't say that he was just learning to use the spear. Ark confirms that he was right, but he's not sure what caused it. Danny apologizes for the summoning, and thanks the wolf for showing up. Otaro thinks it's turned into a disaster. Ark asks what they should do, now that Danny's summoning has been confirmed, and if he recognized that Danny was telling the truth. The man says that it seemed they were mistaken in believing that their summoning had been stolen, and that his son wasn't really trying to kill Danny. The boy replies that yes, he was just trying to scare him a bit, and that he never really wanted to kill him. Danny began to get very angry, thinking that they were still lying. Suddenly, someone appeared to tell him that it wasn't true. That person was Layla. The Duke asks what she was doing there. Layla says that she heard a voice during her walk and that it was addressing Count Soger and Count Tyron. Tyron then wonders if that girl was the Duke's daughter. Ark comments that, in any case, why was she saying that he was lying? Layla replies that in fact, it just happened, that she overheard the conversation during her walk. The boy is very scared, since she heard everything. They ask Layla if that's really what happened, and if she would mind telling them everything she heard. Danny thinks he wasn't expecting her to show up, but thanks to her, things are being resolved smoothly. Otaro asks his son what he was doing at the time, and says he should take the opportunity to apologize now. The boy begins to apologize, saying that he was very wrong. Ark then says that he would like him to apologize to his son and not to him. Otaro understands, and was about to say it to his son. The boy, very angry, ends up apologizing to Danny. Danny then thought that it was really the apology as he lowered his head, but that was because he had no choice, since a third witness had presented facts. He really didn't want to accept that apology, but based on past experience, instead of being stubborn, it would be more beneficial to show generosity. Danny said it was all right, that he accepted the apology. The boy thanks him, and his father is relieved about the situation. The Duke thinks that he knew that boy was very special, and that he could have been stubborn about it, since the other person was wrong. Ark then suggests that they could stop the little argument right there, since, after all, his son has accepted the apology. Personally, he had no intention of letting that incident go, since Tyron's son had tried to kill his son with that invocation. The two of them are very frightened by this, saying that it wasn't like that. Ark says he doesn't want to hear his excuses anymore, and asks them to take his family with them and leave the castle. Otaro thinks that he has come a long way without complaint, and if he were to be excluded from there now, it would all have been for nothing. He needed to stay in the castle at all costs. The man begins to humiliate himself, asking for forgiveness, stating that he would do anything for them, just ask. Ark took his hand away, saying that he had no interest in him, and that he would send the soldiers to their room, so they turn and leave. The Duke calls his daughter, and also leaves. Danny thought that they had started all this, and were now reaping what they had sown, but he didn't know things would turn out this way anyway. He reflects that his father was very scary when he was nervous. Changing the scene, the Duke asks if it's true that Danny defeated that man with a mana bullet. Danny says yes. The Duke then says that he used summoning and magic, and that the boy was really incredible. He asks if in history he has ever seen a person with such talent. The Duke expresses that he was very happy to have such an exceptional son, and says that talent is one thing, but that he was certainly very calm. Normally, when children fight, they get agitated and insist that they are right, but not with Danny. The Duke then says that he has no doubt that his son will grow up to be a good man. Ark says that it's still too early to say that, and that they should wait for Danny to grow up to be sure. The incident was resolved peacefully thanks to Layla, and without her testimony, things could have gotten very ugly. The Duke then realized that they saw Layla in a good light. So, in that case, he could say one thing. The Duke says that, because she simply declared things as they were, he insists that they should talk about a marriage between Danny and his daughter. Ark is surprised by these words, and can't believe that the Duke could be thinking about Danny marrying his daughter. Ark, who was very shrewd, said that the sun was setting, and that it was almost time for the banquet, so he ran off, leaving the poor Duke unable to talk to him. The Duke asked Layla not to worry about the weather, and told her she could stay there with Danny. He then runs off after Ark, saying that they needed to talk for a while. Changing scenes, Lil was talking to Danny. She asks him how a summoner ignored his master, and ended up obeying him. She says that famous summoners have dueled many times in the capital, but she has never seen anything like it. Danny replies that he wasn't sure how it happened. The only thing he knows is that it just happened. Layla says that he was probably hiding something, and that it wasn't fair on her, since she ended up helping him on that mission. Danny then says that he also helped Layla, and asks if she doesn't remember when he helped her with her sword training. Layla then says that, now that she's thought about it, he really was right. However, Danny thinks that she was actually very helpful this time. Danny says that she's just going to say that time when the two of them helped each other, and that they could help each other more often in the future. Layla says that's a great idea, and that she wanted to use it right now. Danny thinks that the girl was really impatient, and really wants to know what she's going to ask for now. He asks her what she wanted, and she replies that she wanted Danny to teach her how to use a mana bullet. He then asks her why she wanted to use something like that. She explains that it's because she wants to grow up too fast, and make at least 2 mana cores before entering the academy. Danny thinks she's still too young, so wonders why she was so impatient like that. She says again that she wants to grow up quickly and protect her mother by making her happy. She says that her mother loves her very much, and that she's sure she'd be very happy if she got strong and grew up quickly. Danny then says that she heard the adults talking about it, and that Daysat Termion is AC Cambula. He then says that she was still in the emission phase. He thinks that he learned it on the battlefield, naturally, and how could he teach it to that girl who has lived her whole life in that Duke's mansion? He then says that they're going to start with something very easy. So first she needed to feel the mana enter her body. He then asked her if she could feel it inside her body. He said yes. If she wanted to expel the mana from her body, she had to learn to control the mana inside it first. And the most important part for her at that moment was her imagination. He then asks her to close her eyes and imagine mana swirling around inside her body as if blood were circulating through her veins. She then says that she is going to do what he has just told her, so she starts trying very hard to do it. Dan then thinks that, from her expression, he can tell that she didn't understand what he said. He says that feeling becomes the basis for everything she can do with mana, and how Aquila was the basis for everything. He's sure she'll be able to do it. After a while, she tells Denny that it wasn't working, and he tells her that it's normal since it's her first time, and even though it's the basics. Then he asked her to focus again. Suddenly then, Arkan arrives on the scene, and he says that even though he was so young, his son was already teaching someone. He said that his son was growing up very quickly. Suddenly the Duke arrived, asking what was going on. Ark is startled by him. The Duke then said that he didn't need to be surprised like that, and asked if it was a couple having a secret meeting late at night. Ark asks what he means by a couple, but how did he get there anyway? The Duke then asks if he's intruded on anything, but either way, it shows discrimination. His wife is a legendary assassin in the Empire, and he asks if he hasn't learned anything from her. Ark then says that he did the best thing he could, but it still wasn't enough. The Duke then says that if the owner of the castle goes around spying on other people's affairs, they will speak ill of him. Ark says that he wasn't spying. He was just following his son. The Duke then asks if he did it too, since he was following his daughter. Ark then says that he wasn't one to talk, but he was a hopeless father. They then end up getting together and watching those two. Layla then asks Dennis if he had a dimensional bag like that. He says yes, his older sister made it for him, and it was a present she sent him recently. Layla then says that her older brothers stopped paying attention to her when they joined the academy. Suddenly she sees that he has summoned a mirror and asks him why. He tells her that he only brought it by chance so that he could help her. She asks him how a mirror could help her at that moment. He then said that the process would be much easier, and told her to imagine something in her mind while she looked into the mirror. Instead of relying solely on her imagination, she could do this. She asks if it could really work, and he says yes. She just needs to stand in front of the mirror to get a full view of herself. She then approaches the mirror and says she's going to try. He then thinks that she was taking it too seriously. Arcton says that it seemed Lily was taking a liking to his son, and the Duke says that it was clear, since it was unusual for her to be so friendly with people. Ark then asks if something has happened to his daughter to make her seem like such a bright child. And so, the Duke ends up getting very serious and says that she's only a bright child on the outside, but they can't say the same on the inside. After her brothers left for the academy, her mother became very ill, so they were no longer able to be together like before. This made it difficult for her to relate to other people. Arcton says that this is what happened to her, and asks the Duke if he understood his daughter's situation, then why did he act so coldly towards his own daughter? The Duke then asks him if he's realized that. In fact, he was doing it on purpose. He says that when his children grew up, he bathed them with attention, and they ended up growing up very spoiled. Arcton says not to assume that Layla will simply grow up that way too, as she could grow up hurt. And no wonder she asked Denny to teach her for a while. The Duke then says that he was still very boring, just like in the old days. And Arkham asks what he was saying. The Duke then asks him if he's taking his son to the capital, and if he's thinking of doing so, asks permission to leave his son at the Duke's house. Layla then says that she finally managed to do it, and Denny says that she was really great. Archon says he'll do it if Denny wants him to, just like he did with Arabelle and Claire. However, he says that if Denny says he's going to the capital, he'll make sure he does what the Duke said. The Duke then says that it would be good if he stopped by when that happens. Ark then asks if he's going mad, since he's going to have to fight them all day. Just then, Denny's mother shows up and says she was wondering where those two had gone, and why they were acting so shamefully like that. She says that, in fact, the love they had for their own children had awakened a strange power in them, and that she wasn't going to pretend that she hadn't seen anything. Changing scenes, Layla ends up thanking Denny, saying that he really was a genius. He then says that he's seen many people call her a genius, but compared to him, she doesn't think it's much. Dan then says that this was just the beginning for her, and that she's sure to grow a lot too. He then thinks that those other two ended up leaving quietly. Layla then asks if he would also go to the academy, which is where all the Empire's geniuses gather. He says he doesn't know yet, and why should he go, since he can get much stronger by training alone. She then told him he was an idiot, and studying wasn't everything. That's where he'll be able to form his noble faction, and he needs to go if he wants to form connections from a young age. He then thinks that, for a 7-year-old, she has a lot of knowledge about how the world works. He says he knows that, but he's not interested in going to the academy yet. And there's a mountain of books he hasn't read yet in the library, and he still has a lot to learn from his parents. She says that's true, but wonders if sometimes he doesn't feel like playing with other children. She also heard that his older sisters were taking part in the academy. He then thinks that Layla was very insistent. He said he was thinking of going in the future, if he wanted to. Layla then says that he'll have to tell her if he does, and he ends up saying yes, he will. She says that when he visits the capital, he needs to visit her house too, and see how much she's practicing, and that's a promise. He then said that everything was fine, and that he would send her a letter when he was planning to go to the capital. Layla then said that everything was fine, and asked when he was going to tell her about his request. He then says he'll tell her when he goes to the capital, and she ends up being very surprised. Changing scenes, they end up saying goodbye and leaving in their carriages. Denny was then holding an object in his hand and asked his father what it was. Arkin says it was his birthday present and he hopes his son likes it. Denny then said that it seemed very valuable. His father then tells him that the symbol of his house, the Termion, is actually vengeance, the sword, and the blacksmith. The history of the house began with their progenitor, who was a blacksmith, and thanks to him, their house has the strongest forge in the Empire. In fact, the best forge on the continent. All the weapons that were made by the Termion ended up guiding that empire, and were made in that forge. Danyon thinks he already knows this. All the ores in the world can be found there, and all kinds of weapons and mystical artifacts are created at the continent's greatest forge. Denny then remembers that the Duke told him that if he goes to the forge and shows them the insignia, they will create a weapon of his choice for him. That insignia is basically a certificate check, and it proves the honor and skill of the person who has it. Ark then says that the insignia was really precious, and asks if it wasn't something the Imperial family wanted. Denny then asks Danyon to grow up and help his father, and Danny thanks him. Layla ends up saying goodbye to him too. His mother then asks Danny if he was sad to see her go again, and he says yes, very much so, because she's practically the first friend he's ever had. His mother then tells him that when he goes to the capital, he'll be able to meet her again, and asks him to make himself even more handsome to meet her. He then thinks that he can't stay there forever, and that he will see her again in the capital. Until then, he asks Layla to be well. The Duke then, in the carriage, says that, thinking back, every time he looks at Denny, he remembers that man, that warrior called Argiri, who showed the skill of a 3-class warrior at such a young age. If he had still been alive, he could have become one of the extra-class knights of the Drenic Empire, and he said he was looking forward to seeing Denny grow up soon. Then, a few days later, Denny was sitting in his room. He says that he's been feeding that egg he got from his sister every morning and evening and wonders if it's too early for it to hatch. He then thinks that the egg was containing a very mysterious familiar, and even if someone isn't a summoner, they'll be able to install the egg with their mana and imprint and as a master before it hatches, and they'll be able to perfectly control that summoning, which usually only lasts temporarily. He thinks that the quality of his mana obviously needs to match that of the familiar, and there are probably a lot of complicated conditions that haven't been met yet, and he's heard that there are eggs that never hatch because those conditions are never met. He hopes that's not the case. He says that even if he changes the flow and strength of his mana, there's no reaction in that egg. He then says that perhaps expecting it to succeed all at once is too greedy of him. Suddenly, Herman asks if Denny is ready. Dan then says that he's already on his way. However, just as Denny was heading for the door, he hears something coming from the egg and says that he definitely heard something. Suddenly, Herman opens the door and asks what he just heard. Dan then asks for a minute, as he's going to check that egg first. However, he thinks there's nothing different and that he's made a mistake, and ends up getting excited about it. Herman then asks if that egg has shown any reaction. Dan then says that he doesn't think it was just his imagination, so they can go now. Changing scenes, Denny is practicing his sword art, and Ermin tells him that he's gotten incredibly stronger with the sword, and asks him when he was practicing with the sword that nobody saw. He says he was practicing just to spin around a bit with the sword. Ermin says it was as expected of a genius, since he was so talented with the sword. Denny thinks that learning to use a new weapon was a lot of fun for him, and that he wasn't able to hold a sword during that time, since his father was watching him so closely that he couldn't do anything. Thank God he hasn't lost his touch yet. Armington tells him to eat some snacks before continuing, and he ends up thanking him for the meal. Denny thinks it might be good to practice that too. Switching the scene to Arkin, he says that the same thing every year was getting very tiring for him, but they still gained a lot during that banquet, and he can confirm that many nobles are paying attention to the South, and that most of those nobles expect a good relationship with them. He says that, since the war ended, the South, with its good climate, holds things that the nobles covet. Perhaps their interest should have been obvious. Even so, their interest can't be compared to the attention Denny has received. The conflict with Count Tyron's eldest son was completely out of his expectations, but he calmly and logically explained the situation in front of the adults, and even confidently proved his talent. He then said that his son was very mature for his age, and sometimes he wanted him to be a bit more childish, like other children his age. Maybe that's just his wish. He ends up looking at his watch and says it's time to go. He then talks about the dragon's tail spear, and says he's going to use it a bit today. Changing scenes, he comes to where Denny was training and wonders why his son was using a sword instead of a spear. He then thinks that that bastard must have said something to him, otherwise he wouldn't be wielding a sword right there, after training with it for so long. But even so, his son seemed very experienced with the sword, and the strength he shows is something that even those who train with the sword all their lives can't emulate. He then wonders when his son learned this. However, one thing was clear: he is really talented with the sword too. His father then tells him that he was watching him, and asks when he learned to use a sword. Denny thinks it would be better to tell his father. Dan then says that he did absolutely nothing to learn that. Arkin asks if that was pure talent, spear, magic, vocation murder, and now sword. If it were anyone else, he wouldn't believe that a child could show talent in other areas. He asks his son if he was curious about the world, and Denny asks what he meant by that. His father says it was about the world outside, the world through the walls, and he says that sometimes he thinks that maybe that county is too small for Denny's talent, and he'll be the one who loses out if he stays there. Denny then thinks that it looks like his father has finally realized that he can't stay there forever. Denny says that, to be quite honest with him, he was very curious. Arkin then says that this is great, and they need to start preparing for him to leave that world. Denny asks if he's really going to do that, and Arkin says yes, although it's unfortunate, he'd have to fulfill his son's wish. He says he's brought something a little more special for him today. He asks him if he recognized that spear, and he says that it was the dragon's tail that reacted to him on his birthday. Dan then thought that he did remember that dragon's tail. Arkin then asked him to hold the spear, and when Denny picked it up, he said that it had incredible power. Arkin thinks that she was reacting much more strongly than when he was a year old. His father then thinks that no one can blame him now, and that he's going to make his son's mana talent shine even brighter. He then tells his son that that spear will one day be his. But before that, he needs to get strong enough to wear it with pride. Denny says that it was clear, and that instead of using the dragon's tail, he will work hard to use his father's teachings with pride. Arkin says that it's as expected of his son and asks if it was alright for them to start now. He says yes. Changing scenes. In his bed, Denny says that the outside world has always been too curious for him to know about it. Even during the days when he was in the middle of the war camp and his life with Argiri, all he knew was war, setting up camp, cleaning weapons, and eating unparalleled food, as well as going into battle. The only way out of it was if the war ended or if he died in battle. There were only two ways, and he couldn't imagine a life outside the battlefield. But as Danny, the situation is very different. He says he doesn't know how his talent will be used in that new life and how the world will accept him, or what he can do in that world. But the opportunity to travel everywhere and accomplish anything is truly incredible. He says that for a long time, he just wanted to stay there and enjoy the warmth of the place. But thanks to his father's question, his thoughts changed completely. Just then, his mother enters the room and asks him if he has made up his mind. He wonders when she came in. She tells him that he doesn't need to worry about that, as he was so pensive that he didn't even hear her knock on the door. She then says that she heard from his father that he was very pensive. She then asked him if he was really curious about the world outside. Danny replied that he was, and his father said that it would be a waste of talent to stay there. After thinking about it for a while, he ended up being curious about the outside world too. So he ends up apologizing to his mother. She then told him that he didn't need to apologize. Denny said that his sisters were no longer there, and that if he went to the outside world, they would be alone. She said it was all right, and as his mother, she knew he had incredible talent. Even if he didn't want to, the outside world would call him, and it would be incredible if he could spend more time there with his mother. But the world won't do that for him, so she asked him to go and do it. He then says that even if he leaves their house, he will always come back and tell them everything he saw in that world. His mother ends up thanking him for this. She then says that it seems she needs to prepare to send him out into the world, just like his father. He then asks why she would need to prepare. She says she was planning to teach him to track and go slowly from there, but she'll also need him to contribute to setting and avoiding the traps. He wonders if he'll get special lessons from his mother too. She then tells him that he needs to learn corpse disposal skills and the structure of the human body. He then thinks he'll be too exhausted before he jumps out of there, but she says that, like his mother, she will teach him many things anyway. He says he'll do his best to learn all this. He then thinks that he was very privileged to receive special lessons from his parents, and with a lot of love. Then it is said that in the region of the southern empire of Alteon, in the county of Sogis, with a warm climate and abundant natural resources, that place became a cornerstone in the empire of Alteon, so that they would not tire during the war. Thanks to Magnam and Count Sogis' decision, it was a region of peace and warmth, and finally the war was over for good. The few small rebel forces were also seized, and finally an era of peace seemed to persist for all eternity. Suddenly then, some people were commenting that they had heard a rumor that the young Denny Master had actually visited the stores. He wonders if it was really true. Someone else said that it was true, and that he had bought something in the store. It was heard that the shopkeeper's eldest daughter even fainted that day. She then said that the rumors were true, and that she had heard that he was getting more handsome every day, and said that she wished she could see his face at least once. She had heard that he wasn't engaged to anyone yet, and wondered if she should try. Her friend then asked her if she was going mad, and told her to wake up, since he was only 14. These people from back in the day are too much, aren't they? And to make matters worse for this woman, she says that she's heard that he doesn't look 14, and that he was as tall as the Count. The other woman then says that maybe it's because the Countess is tall too. She says that one thing is clear: he could be mistaken for being 20, and says that his silver hair is very beautiful, and his green eyes also make anyone's heart stop. Her friend then says that she needs to see him the next time he comes, and wonders when she thinks he'll be back. She then says that she's heard that he often visits the stores, and come to think of it, she also heard it from the forester. She then says that it would be easier to meet the forest guardian first. She then asks her friend if she was really thinking of doing that. Changing scene, in a forest on the outskirts of the Shire, was an area infused with ancient magic, the Forest of the Last Days. There, Danny was carrying out an escape mission that his mother, Lily Soger, had given him. He then mentions that the wind direction was going south, and that, since he saw the Cheryl spider there before, he needs to go west. So we see that Daniel has really grown up a lot. He says that he only needed 3 more hours, and that he had to get out of there before the sun went down. He then ends up running through the branches of the trees, and he says that one of the most important things about assassination is not getting caught by your enemies. Throughout this testing period, he had to avoid the traps and nets set up by his mother and escape from that forest which is home to all kinds of monsters. He then thinks that he needs to breathe, to inhale the air and mana from the surroundings, and hold it for a while before breathing again, prioritizing stealth and assimilating the environment. He then says that this is how hidden traps start to reveal themselves. That's exactly what was happening right now. He says that there were thin, almost transparent ropes filling the whole area, and that it seemed as if the traps would be activated as soon as they touched them. He says that this was the most basic thing of all, but that's also why the mechanism was the most dangerous. He said it was a relief that it was easy to disarm, but suddenly in the trees, there were some monsters, and they all ended up attacking our protagonist. He then says that he didn't expect those monsters to appear there, and says that they have a very frightening speed, and he needs to deal with it as quickly as possible. He wonders if it's more dangerous to touch the trap in the process. Then he tells them that there's nothing more he can do, and that he needs to get out of there right now. He then runs off, and those monsters start following him. Those monsters then end up touching the ropes, and the trap activates, piercing them all. Danny is then very happy that they fell for it, and that he dealt with them all without even doing anything. Suddenly, however, he realizes that more have appeared, and that they are already very close to him, almost making him unable to dodge. Just as he was about to dodge, he said that the bug was too fast. Shortly afterwards, the bug ends up spitting something in his direction. Danny then manages to defend himself with some ease, but he says that whatever was spitting at him would be very dangerous, and that he couldn't waste any time there. He then lunges at the monster, breaking it in half with his spear. Then, at sunset, he ends up lying on the ground and says he thinks he's going to throw up. He only just managed to escape from that unsafe forest. Suddenly, he feels the presence of something and wonders if there are more monsters there. He gets up quickly, saying that he has let his guard down. However, he realizes that it was actually his mother, and she says she was very impressed with him. She says it was a total of 3:30 and that he was much faster than her. He then asks his mother if she was watching him the whole time, and she says that of course she couldn't just let him go by himself. She knows his talent better than anyone, but because it's a bit different, Danny says he understands her side, but she says that he did incredibly well and that she couldn't find any fault with him. She asks if he was hurt, and he says everything was fine. She then says that at this rate, he'll end up being discovered as a murderer. She then asks him to take it and says that it seems to suit him better now than it does her. He then says that it was Night Thor's dagger and asks if he could really use it. She said of course, since she wasn't going to use it anyway. He then tells her that Night Thor was created from the mysterious Aterio ore, the ore that can carry the elements of the object, and that if you want it to, it can store all the poisons in the world. He says that he knows he can even mix absorbed poisons and use them. He then thanks his mother, saying that he will put it to good use. She then says that they should go back now. He then thinks that that was all the training he could get from his mother. Suddenly he hears a noise and asks his mother if she heard it too. She said that it sounded like someone was in the forest and that they needed to go quickly. He ended up agreeing with her. The scene shifts to Sauges County in the Annex Tower. Suddenly a man wakes up startled in his bed, saying that he was definitely eating mushrooms in the forest. At this point, Danny asks him if he's awake and tells him that the man is being detoxified. He then asks him not to move too much. He then asks what a young man was doing there and if it was the boy who ended up saving his life. Danny says yes, since he ate a red-nosed mushroom. Luckily, he was nearby and found him in time. The old man asks if it really was a red-nosed mushroom. Danny says that it was a very dangerous mushroom, and that if they had been just a little late, he would certainly have died. Danny then offers him some water, and he thanks him for it. Danny then realizes that there was an insignia from Nikon's magic tower on his belt, and that he was no ordinary person. If it hadn't been for Night Thor, he wouldn't have been able to save him. The man thanks Danny again and asks where he was. He tells him that he was in the Annex Tower of Sauges County. The old man thinks that not only did he get lost in the southern region, but he was also poisoned by the mushroom and walked all the way there. Danny then asks him to get some rest, that he's going to warn his father, and soon his father will see that old man. ActionToon says that if he said father, then he must be the youngest son. He says that yes, he was the youngest son of the Count of Sauges. Here is the text with the punctuation correction. Wellington says that the boy was Arabella's older brother, the genie, being looked up to by all the magic towers. He then asks how Denny found him. Denny then says that he was actually training with his mother in the forest. He wonders if he was going mad, if he was training in that crazy forest. The old man then thinks that even he, a wizard of 8 chains, got lost in that place and that his mana flow converted while he was casting his magic, ruining his body. He asked Dennis if that was true, since the whole forest knew ancient magic and there were cursed traps everywhere. He says that it was, and the forest was their property. Denny says it was a dangerous place for anyone who wasn't a member of House Soges. Also, as the flow of mana is different from what modern mages use, it's the worst place for a mage to be. He says that the man was in grave danger from that mushroom. Vinton says that indeed, he was almost killed. However, he realizes that that boy was already strong enough to train in that forest. That was very impressive indeed. The man then asks if it was the boy who made the antidote for him, and Denny says yes. The man then thinks that the boy seemed to be in his late teens, but had formulated an antidote that requires extensive knowledge and precise production skills. He then wonders how such a family could exist, apart from those 2 generational geniuses. Even the youngest son was a genius, and if they had been at war to this day, the county of Soges could have become the most powerful noble house in the Empire of Alteon. Hans says he was in debt to that boy, and Denny says he really was. The man thinks that boy was very bold. Vaughn says that he should pay his debts, and he says that first, let him introduce himself. He then says that his name is Sidron Gauss, and that not long ago he was the head of Nikon's magic tower. He says that he invites Denny to share whatever he wants with him, and that he has everything, except that he doesn't. He was a former head of the magic tower. He was a former head of Nikon's magic tower. Denny then thinks that the man must be referring to a subspace, and asks him if he's serious about what he's saying. He thinks that there are many wizards who survive without a home, putting everything in a subspace. Felito ends up being surprised by the boy's attitude, thinking that he said he was the head of the magic tower, and normally people would be surprised or humiliated by him, but that boy didn't care one bit. The man then tells him that he won't get a chance like this ever again, and that he doesn't need to hold back at that moment. He can tell him what he wants. Denny says he'll think about it later, and the old man ends up getting very angry, thinking that he was being indifferent to the end and what kind of things were in that boy's head. Denny turns away, tells him to get some rest, and closes the door. Wellington says that he was the first one to treat him like that, and then says that he was thinking of taking his leave after staying a day or 2, but that apparently won't work. Now, he needs to take a closer look at that interesting guy. Denny then goes to talk to Herma. He asks if he really was the head of the magic tower, and that he must be extremely skilled on the battlefield. Denny then says that he's sure he is, since he's heard that he's a wizard with 8 chains. Herman then says that if he has 8 chains, then he's higher than Arabella's law. Denny says yes. Herman tells the young master that this meant he was a powerful figure and owed him money, and the magic towers function as independent territories of these continents, as if they were a nation. Denny then says, who would have thought that he would be such an influential person? However, Herman says that he wonders what the head of a magic tower was doing, wandering around a forest. The boy replies that this place is no ordinary forest. It's what the wizards consider a forbidden area, and they call it the Forest of the Last Days. Armington says that the Forest of the Last Days also sounded like a challenge to the wizards, but he was lucky to have survived thanks to it. Denny then asks the airman to get him a new sword, as the one he was using now was too light and short. He then says that he understood, and that those were all the war spoilers that the Count brought back. So, he's going to prepare a longer sword for tomorrow's training. Denny ends up thanking him, saying he'll call it a day. He then remembers that he had something very important, and that was the insignia Duke Termion gave him. It's been 5 years since that day, and if he goes to the capital, he absolutely must visit him. Changing scenes, his father asks Denny if he's been training hard today, and Denny says yes. He thought his father had business to attend to outside the castle today, and asks why he came back early. He replies to his son that he has more unfinished business than expected today, and that he had a reason to rush home. Denny asks if it was because of the head of the magic tower. He says it was more or less like that, and who knows? Maybe he could help Arabella, since he could be a good master for her. Dan then thinks that it was as expected, and that he was thinking that, somehow, maybe the head of the magic tower could be useful to Arabella, but he's not sure he could handle her temper, since she punched her former master in the eye. Arcton says that, in any case, his son ended up helping someone to survive, and Danny says that he simply did what had to be done. However, his father says that not just anyone could do that, and that what he did was truly incredible. Denny asks if his sisters couldn't go this time. His father then wonders why it was so difficult to get a glimpse of his own daughter's faces. Arabella, having just finished her extended semester, is choosing a magic tower to take part in, and he's heard that Claire has been asked by her teacher to accept a teaching assistant position. Denny says that both his sisters are very impressive, and his father says that his sisters are really impressive, but he also had high expectations for him. He wonders how the world will deal with him and his many talents. Denny says he was also wondering the same thing. His father then begins to smile, saying that catching someone off guard already made him laugh. Denny thinks that in the Duke Termion fight, he wished he could fight him again. But in any case, he wonders how Lily is doing. Her last letter is over a year old, and he thinks he can find out when he goes to the capital. Then, a few days later, the old man was indignant because he still hadn't fully recovered and was already starting to go mad just staying in that room. The man who was looking after him told him that he could venture out, but not too far. Also, for the time being, he was forbidden to use magic. He says that his magic flow hasn't been purified perfectly yet, and that the poison in his body hasn't been completely nullified, so he'll have to wait a bit longer. Velito says that he didn't have much choice and that it's been a long time since he was last able to use magic, so this will really be a change of pace for him. Velito ends up getting up, saying that he can't stand it any longer and that he's going to go out for a while. The other man said that he didn't even know how to get around and that he would probably get lost again. But the old man was already knocking on the door and leaving. He says that if that guy gets into trouble, he'll be blamed for it. So he turns to the maids, one of whom says that wizards are usually either geniuses or madmen. One of them says that he's been up and down the building dozens of times and that now he's spent a few hours looking at the flowers in the yard. They then say that he must be an incredibly powerful figure among wizards, but that he seemed more like a madman, and that Mrs. Arabelle needed more normality in her life. The man then sat down in front of the garden and asked who had created it. He said that he would never do something as great as that, and that those flowers had extraordinary magic. Donnet ends up appearing, saying that he stopped by to check on him, so that's where he was hiding. The old man then asks him if he thought he'd run off somewhere, and that he'd been told to stay there until he'd fully recovered. And Danny says that's exactly what it was. He says that, in any case, it was a very beautiful region and a good place to rest and recover. He can understand why the nobles come south when the vacation season arrives. Danon says that it really was an incredible place, but it was a shame that he was considering leaving soon. The man then asks why he wanted to leave and where he was going. Denny says he's not going that far, as he was planning to go to the capital. Wellington said that if he was going to the capital, that meant he was going to the academy, and asked if his sisters were already at the academy. He says yes, and the old man tells him that he'll have a very easy life there. He thinks that his sisters were very famous there and had absurd levels of talent, so he wonders how much talent that boy has. He then says he should take a look at it, and when he ends up looking at Danny's mana, he ends up getting scared, wondering what kind of thick mana it was. And his mana was incredibly thick. If the geniuses in his age group could be considered a chain, then that boy is the fastest and angriest of them all. This amount of magic would normally be so stable that it would be exploding, so he wondered how he was managing to keep it up. Danny then says that he couldn't evaluate someone else's mana if he didn't have permission. That was a bit rude. Velito ended up apologizing, saying that it was prudent of him. However, the old man was thinking that there was no way he could believe that. Could there really be a person who possesses such incredibly dense mana as this boy? Danny was wondering what he could have seen that made him so surprised. The man then thinks about why he doesn't see any magic circles on him, and with that kind of density, he should be able to see a magic circle. He then says that it couldn't be true. That boy had 2 mana cores. The man then asks how he managed to form mana cores, and Denny asks if there's something wrong with their formation. The old man says that, of course there is. He has such a crazy density of mana, and yet he actually plans to wield a spear and have that kind of magic with just 2 cores and no circles. He's voluntarily turning his back on the greatest talent ever seen in history. Den then asks if he simply couldn't use both. Velito ends up getting frustrated at hearing this, and wonders where in the world he should start explaining it. He then asks Dennis if he knew why the lifespan of a magical swordsman was so short. They are powerful because they have mana cores and circles simultaneously. However, cores and circles interfere with each other, and when they collide, a gigantic problem arises. It's a law of the species. The mana compressed in the core is transmitted to the circle, so the circle that can't deal with the result of their conflict ends up exploding. Dennett thinks he's discovered this on his own, but wonders if it's serious and impossible. The man then said that it was a waste of talent. Danon asks if it was impossible to use magic without a circle. Hans says that although it's not impossible, without the refinement of a circle, how could he use spells that require purified magic? Besides, it's not as if no one before him had thought of it. However, most attempts ended in failure. Den then asks if he should try this. He's never tried it before, but it seems like it should be possible. The man then man wonders what that crazy kid was saying, and Danny says that if he remembers the magic code, he might be able to do it. He then begins to summon his mana, and his body is completely filled with flames. Dan then says that, even so, he's only at the level of basic first stream magic. The old man wonders how that was possible. That boy clearly has a magic circle. So how was he using magic? He then says that it really was absolutely unbelievable, and that he should only be able to use raw magic by refining a circle. Dan then says that his sister Arabella told him that his affinity for magic was very high, and that perhaps that was the reason. The myth thinks that this is what the commoners meant when they discovered that impossible to imitate gifts came from that boy. He wonders if something like that could be called innate talent. Danon thought that it really worked, so he could use magic without a magic circle. Now, the man, very frightened, thinks that his innate mana affinity, together with the most powerful mana of anyone in the world, makes that boy really the most promising talent in the world. The man then asks Denny if he was considering becoming his disciple. He then says that ignoring such an incredible talent would be a real shame for him. He then asks Dennis if, by any chance, he knew how to use second stream magic. He replies that he doesn't know the code, so he can't. Hyten tells him that it's great, and if he becomes his disciple, he'll be able to do up to 8 chain magic straight away. But Danny replies that he doesn't want to, and that old man ends up getting very angry with Denny. Aaron then shows up, saying that he didn't know he had gotten close to his son so quickly. He then asks his son what the two of them were discussing, and Denny tells him that he kept asking him to become his disciple, but he refused. The man then, all out of sorts, says that his son has an incredible talent to become a great magician, and that he could probably become greater than he can imagine. And he even managed to use chain magic without a circle. Ark ends up being very surprised by this, and asks his son if it's true. Denny answers yes, and Arkin says he's sure he didn't have any basic knowledge of magic. The man says that this is why his talent is so impressive. Ark then says that, as expected of the former head of the Magic Tower, since he could immediately see his son's talent. However, the man says that it wasn't simply a question of having talent. His son is actually a genius, and he could even become a rare magical swordsman. At this point, Arkin starts to think very hard about it, and Denny thinks it's a word he should never use in front of his father. The man then says that's exactly what it was. A magic swordsman. He asks if he was finally interested in it, and if he became his disciple, he would take full responsibility for the boy and make him the best magical swordsman in the Empire. However, the man ended up realizing that Air wasn't enjoying it at all. Ark then shouts angrily that he couldn't become a magic swordsman. The man, afraid, asks why, since the boy was perfectly suited to becoming a magical swordsman, and why he doesn't think it's a good idea. Ark then says that instead of Dennis becoming a magical swordsman, he should become a magical spearman instead. And the man wonders what he meant by that, and why all the people in that family are like that. Switching scenes, Dennis is thinking that in order to become a magician, you need to become a disciple, and this carries a great meaning. Mages usually create successors through the act of something called inheritance, and this tradition has been carried on since ancient times and is still practiced today, even in modern times when universal magical education has been established. He then says that this is exactly what the head of the Magic Tower is looking for. He's not just a disciple, but a successor. He says that, considering that an 8-stream archmage is walking around him like that, it means that his talent really is quite incredible. And after hearing so much praise, he feels something very big in his body, and he's sure it's that thing. He remembers his sister saying that when he wants to see her, all he has to do is pour magic into that crystal ball. He then picks up the crystal ball and says he's going to ask his sister, Arabella, about it. He ends up calling his sister, who is very happy to receive a call from him. She is then amazed at what she hears, that Denny had used first chain magic and he didn't even have a magic circle. Denny then says that's exactly what it is, and it worked when he tried it. He then says that he knew his mana affinity was very high, but she never expected it to be so great. He says that the circle only takes care of circulation and purification. Perhaps his mana is already at the pure stage. She then says that they need to do a test on this, and asks Denny to send a mana stone to the transmission machine in his room, and asks if he could put some of his mana there. He says yes, he understands. He then thinks that he was very happy to have an older sister. Anyway, he wanted to learn a bit about his mana, and he heard that his sister is already on the 6th stream. He's sure that will help a lot. His sister then says that, by the way, since he's using first chain magic, he'll probably get a lot of attention at the academy. Denny says that he'd rather not draw too much attention to himself, and she says that there's no way he can avoid that, since talent always draws attention from others. And she was supposed to tell him that if anyone tried to intimidate him, she would destroy them completely. Dennett says he heard that she ended up breaking the nose of that student who was in love with her, the Duke of Diavel's second son, and she angrily tells him not to mention that bastard. And she says that, in any case, even with a magic circle, given enough time, the purity of his mana will continue to increase. He then says that he didn't know that, and she says that, since he's not sure, they should take a look at that point. A girl then says that the professor was looking for Arabella. He then tells his sister that she needs to go now, and that he'll get in touch with her later. Danny ends up saying goodbye to her, saying that he'll send her the magic stone soon. He thinks that he might be opening up a path that has never been opened before, and that he never thought his sis would be so pure like that. He wonders if he has a dragon's heart in there or something. Switching scenes to the old man, he said that he was about to die, since he had used mana to confirm that boy's status, and his condition had gotten much worse as a result. He thought he could get out of there soon, but that was out of the question. However, if he had accepted his offer, everything would have paid off in the end. He wondered what he should do to have that talented boy by his side. He wonders if he should give him some of the great artifact or the heirloom magic that has been passed down from previous generations. But he says no, that was already too much. And if he's been cheated after that, he won't have anything left. Just then, Danny knocks on the door, asking if he's inside. The old man then wonders if he was there to apologize, or perhaps if he had changed his mind. He then asks Denny to come in. Denny then says that he came to him because he had something to say. The old man asked what it was. The old man then smiles and says that he knew this was going to happen, so he decided to become his disciple. But Danny says no. The man then asks why he was there, since he said he had no interest in magic. Danny says that it's not that he has no interest. The old man then asks, why doesn't he want to be his disciple? He asks if he already has another teacher. Danny answers no to both questions. Ving then says that if it wasn't for either of those two reasons, why was he there to see him? Den then thinks that he doesn't know the code of the second magic chain yet, and it's difficult to learn it from his sister, since she lives so far away. And in the end, the best method was to learn it from Sir Dran, since he owed him a favor for saving his life in the forest, and couldn't refuse that offer. Dan then told him that he didn't just want to walk the wizard's path. The old man then asked him if he really wanted to be a magic lancer, and he said no. He wanted to become a summoner assassin magic lancer. Velito wonders if there really was such a thing, and Danny says that he wanted to add swordsman to that list too. However, the guy asks what kind of nonsense he was talking about, and asks if he's still going to refuse, even though he knows he won't have a chance of becoming his disciple ever again in his life. And Denny says yes. Omito thinks that this boy was really prepared for his ways. Vel then thinks of something and asks Denny if he'd be interested in a letter of recommendation, and he says that he heard he wanted to join the academy, and if he wrote a letter of recommendation for him, he could start with a good reputation there. Denny then says that, thinking about it, that wasn't a bad offer. He then said it was fine, and the old man asks if they could talk now. Denny then asked if he could make another request. The old man was thinking that, finally, that guy had changed sides. He says he'll get on with it and hold him once and for all, and says that, of course, he could ask him anything. Denny then asks if he could teach him the second stream code. The man says of course, since he knows the arrangement code for all the second stream spells in existence. The old man then thought that he was still too young, and said that a letter of recommendation for the academy and a second stream code were nothing. He then asks if they could start the class, even though he's not in the best condition right now, but that was nothing to him. Danny says it could be better, and he thinks he's just caught a big fish. Denny says that he would say that he should reward him for saving his life in the forest, and it was he himself who said he would do it. Since he owed him, he could ask for anything, and that's why he had asked for what he wanted. The old man then asked him if he wasn't going to become his disciple, and Denny said no, that wasn't going to happen. The old man told him he was wrong, and why did a 14-year-old have such a good mindset? The big man says that he asked him 2 questions and he only owed him 1. Denny says that he was wrong actually, since firstly he saved him in the forest, and secondly, he ended up nullifying the poison that was in his body, and he also wanted to add the fact that he carried him on his back all the way to his house, but he'll leave that as a bonus for him. The old man wonders how such a daring child could exist in this world. Changing scene, the two were already at the training ground. The man thinks that if he keeps doing him favors, he might change his mind in the future, and it would be too much of a waste to give up a talent and magical power like that. And he says that it's not a problem that he created a core instead of a circle of mana. The most important part is that he managed to use chain magic without a circle. The code for the second magic key he's going to explain now, and it's very complicated. There are many people who can't do it and even give up, He then asks Dennis to concentrate and listen well. He then thinks that the boy's eyes were very bright, but he's not going to make it any easier for him, as he couldn't be fooled by that boy. He then says that second stream codes are on a completely different level to first stream codes. It's because he needs to calculate the amount of mana, the density of the mana floating in the atmosphere, and even the state of his body, all at the same time. That's the reason most people give up on magic. Valino thinks that he probably didn't understand anything he was saying, and he will naturally try to ask him for a simpler explanation. So he says that was the basics of the explanation, and asks the boy if he understood. And he says he did. He says it was great to learn not only the code of magic, but also information he had no idea about. The old man is then startled, wondering if he really understood everything he said. Then he was to tell him about the laws of magic reorganization. He said that the first law is coexistence. Magical power can exist with the physical world and with other sources of mana. And through coexistence, magicians use their own magical power, and the magical power around them to activate their magic. The second is conservation. Wellington thinks that he has perfectly understood the nature of magic, and Denny says that if his magical power can collect enough of the material element, then, through conservation, he can display magic through all the different elemental attributes. Valentin thought that he was also adding his own interpretations, and most people would find that very boring, but that didn't seem to be the case with him. And how could someone who likes that exist in that world? Wellington says that every time his chain gets longer, the code also becomes much more complicated. Instead of explaining it, he should demonstrate it. And he says that, for example, Aquila was the basic magic of the first chain and can be cast using simple rules. However, all that changes in the second chain onwards and can't even be compared to the first chain. And that was the magic code of the second chain. Danon thinks that it was all tied together in very complicated ways, and seems more difficult than in theory. He then says that that was the code for the fire magic formula of 2 chains, called the fire arrow. What's more, if he wants to use more of them, he'll need to use the code many more times. So, Denny should be surprised now. He's never seen the code for rearranging second stream magic. He then asks if it didn't seem complicated to him. It would take most people at least a year, and only then would they be able to use the first stream codes freely before they could use the second stream code. He then thinks that no matter how brilliant a person is, they won't be able to understand some of the code. But the most important thing now is the rule. If he can't figure it out, nothing else matters. So he'll watch you for about a week and slowly work out the technique. Denny then asks if he should try now too, but the man says it would be too difficult for him to try now. Danny then activates the first chain. The man was then impressed that he could create lines of definite length and width, and it was very impressive indeed. He then realized that the first chain was already very easy for him. Denny then says that now it was what he had just shown him, and this leaves the old man amazed, saying that it really was unbelievable, since he had perfectly replicated the code for rearranging the second chain magic and understood it after seeing his demonstration just once. He then asked Danny how he did it, and Danny says that when he watched, he ended up memorizing the rules and patterns, and he ended up forming his magic with them in mind. So, it wasn't too difficult. Valentin thinks that even he, who is a magic genius, took a while to come up with the second chain, and that boy managed to materialize it without even a circle. Denny then says he's going to try the fire arrow too. He then very easily managed to replicate that too, and the guy wondered how he could replicate it so easily like that. It really was absurd, and if he had that boy's talent, he would have been able to reach even the 9th chain. Denny asked him if he was doing it right, and the man said yes, and he was really good. He was much quicker to learn than he had expected. Denny then says that he was also surprised because he managed it the first time. The old man then thinks that the uncircled magician, the world will really go crazy when it sees that, and he needs to hide his talent completely, as many people might try to get close to him. He needed to do that, at least until he became his disciple. H-Ton asked if they could schedule a different code now, and Danny said yes, but the old man was just wondering how he could write that letter of recommendation for the academy. Switching scenes to Danny in his bed, he says that the magic lesson was much more fun than he expected. Practical theory needs chains. He learned both today, and since he's been able to use magic, he keeps thinking about one thing. In his previous life, he was at a point where he had no choice but to renounce magic, and at that moment, he didn't even know when he was going to die. Trying to find time to learn magic was a luxury he couldn't afford, and in order to survive, he had to fight with his sword, because magic, to a certain extent, prioritizes theoretical learning over confidence and practice, and that makes him look differently at this new life. Combining the theory he learned from his older sister and the natural talent he has, he is able to show explosive growth with just simple guidance. And since he's being taught by a former tower master, what magic could he learn tomorrow? Then half a month passes. His father then asks Denny what he wanted him to do, if it was a magic reagent. Denny says yes, they don't have the materials, so he has to leave the territory. But he doesn't have to worry about that. He's already learned 4 rearrangement codes. His father then says that it wouldn't normally take a month to learn those codes, and that information about magical reagents shouldn't be easy to obtain either. He asks how he learned it, and Danny says that he learned it while reading books about magic in the library, and they ended up catching his interest. The man says that, as expected, geniuses really are very different, and he never expected that he would be curious about magic reagents, as many people find them very boring. But he'll also have fun when he's choosing the materials. His father then tells him that it will be a good experience for him, as he will be out of the territory. Changing the scene, Denny was on his horse, and everyone was talking about Denny passing by and how beautiful his silver hair was. Denny then asked if everyone was all right, and that he would be back later to pick up some snacks. The man then thinks that it seems the Count isn't a cruel person, judging by the way he treated him, and says that there are lots of good things down south. Delicious snacks, great weather, and good people too. And seeing all that, it would be very difficult to go back to the capital. Denny then says, that's just it. It was very hot down there. The man asked how long it would be before they reached the magic supply store. Denny replies that he wasn't sure yet, as he's never been there before. So he asks Herman to guide them, and Herman says it's not very far. Changing scenes, he arrives at the magic supply store. So the store owner tells him that, like the rumors, her silver hair and emerald eyes are really beautiful. Denny asks how business has been recently, and she says it's the same as always. Not many people come in to buy magic supplies, and she's been selling things to foreigners or people who have an interest in magic. But still, to see the previous Lord of the Magic Tower, Sidrin, is certainly a pleasure, and Denny thinks she recognized him at first. And it makes sense, since there are only a few people who are the heads of the magic towers within their empire. She then asks everyone to make themselves at home, and if there's anything they want, she'll look for it. She then tells him that, since it's his first time in the magic supply store, he can look around at his leisure, so she goes to talk to the owner. He said everything was fine, and when he looked around he said that the place was full of fresh things. In some very strange way, he felt a kind of deja vu there. What's more, if he touches the fountains, he can see their magical reaction and thinks it might be because of the high affinity he has with magic. Suddenly then, he asks what that sound was, and there's a particularly strong reaction coming from there. He wonders what exactly it could be. The woman then says that those are decorative items. Sidrin asks why he doesn't go and have a look at the ingredients and potions together, and moonroot must be a good basic ingredient. The woman tells him that it was an excellent choice, and that there are at least 50 different potions that contain moonroot. She has processed them herself, and so they were of high quality. Denny then said that there was something very strange there. He realizes that what was attracting his attention was actually that rock, and ends up walking towards it. Armin then asks what was happening to him, and he says that there was something strange about that stone. Armin wonders if it wasn't just for decoration, and Denny says he wasn't sure, but that it was a very unusual stone. He says it was just as he imagined. If he added more magic, the reaction would be stronger. He wonders if it could only be reacting to his mana. The girl then told Sidrin that he had really good eyes, and that it would be perfect as a sample. Denny ends up asking her where she got it. Sidrin then asks what it was, if it was some kind of stone. She tells him that they were just for decoration. He then thought that this was impossible. How could a decoration have such a magical reaction? Just thinking about it frustrated him. Sidrin then asks the woman if anyone has cheated her with this thing. She says that a few years ago, some mask makers gave her a large package as payment. When she opened it, there was this stone inside. She wasn't sure what it was, so she took it to a magician to assess. In the end, it was just a stone, and there was nowhere else to put it but up there. Denny thought it was really strange, and of course it wasn't just a normal rock. She then tells him that if he's looking for something good, he should follow her. She says that there are actually some special magical artifacts up there, and that she could show him everything now. She then says that that was her name scroll card. Denny thinks that, as much as it looks like there's a lot of good stuff on there, what he wants is actually in his hand. The woman then tells him that if he puts it there, it automatically stores any information that is on it, and all he has to do is say a person's name and then their business card will appear. Denny then says he's going to take the business card roll and also that stone. She then asks why he would want such a useless stone. He thinks he's sure it wasn't just an object he could leave there. Sidrin asks what he intended to do with it, and he says he didn't know Denny was interested in decorative things or pieces of art. wondered, could there be something special about that stone? Denny then asks if he noticed, and of course it was strange that he should buy a useless decoration. That stone was definitely not just a decorative stone, since it was responding to his magic. Sidran then says that he's not sure what that stone is either, but hearing that has definitely piqued his interest. He says that there were a lot of people around, so they should go back to the castle to take a closer look. He then asks if he can really find out what that stone is with this, and wonders if he was disregarding his tool, which was invaluable for experimentation. He replies that he can definitely find out what it is with it. Denny says that, even so, the wizard has already evaluated it, and said that there's nothing special about it. Sidran then says that what that wizard has done is unparalleled, and he has invested all his funds in that state-of-the-art tool. It can analyze any object or tool you place on top of it. Denny then says that it really looked incredible, so they had to try it out. Sidran then asks him to put the stone up there, and then put his magic on the stone. Suddenly, the stone begins to glow, and Denny asks if there's something special about it. Sidran thinks he can finally hold his head up high. Suddenly, Denny asks if it's a code, and Sidran replies that it is, but it's not just any code. Denny then thinks that it really was incredible, and it's a code whose rules, structure, and, of course, arrangement have never been seen before. It could be as complex as a code of 6 or 7 chains. Denny says that magic was hidden in that stone, and now it was manifesting itself in that code. Sidran then says that it's as he said. It was his magic that contained the key to unlocking that code. He says this because it only responds to his magic. He then asks what that could be and what the magic was in that stone, and why it only responds to his magic. Sidran then says that the magic sealed inside it was unfamiliar to him, since he has a reputation as the former head of the magic tower. He's going to try to do it. Denny then says that if he succeeds, he might be able to find out why his magic is different from other people's magic. Switching scenes to Arabelle's lab, she says that it was different from what she expected, and is clearly different from normal magic. It's a special feature in the magic code that Denny shared with her, which even she doesn't have. So, you think though, what is the appropriate field of magic for this? And it's not revealed in those results. Magical reagents, magical gates, and magical engineering. If it's none of those, what could it be? She says she's sure there's something to it. He then realized that it could be one thing. There was a magic field code that had been lost. Denny's magic might be suitable for that. She then wonders where he put it. She then says that it was there. Alchemy, divination, spiritualism, and necromancy. And there's even a primitive magic code. Suddenly, another book falls beside her, and she asks what it was. When she picks it up, she realizes it's a book of ancient magic, and it says that, come to think of it, there was a magical kingdom a long time ago, and there was also inherited magic called Arcana. Given that it's an ancient magic from 2,000 years ago, there's no one who knows how to use it now. What she's saying is that ancient magic that disappeared over 2,000 years ago means there's no chance of Denny's magic being suitable for it. However, she has nothing to lose, so she should give it a try right now. She then began to use her mana on that crystal, and said that it was beginning to show her something. She wonders what it could be. Alchemy or divination? It would be great if it wasn't necromancy. However, when she read the paper, she was very frightened by the result, saying that it was unbelievable, and how on earth was that possible? Back at Denny's, the old man tells him that the seal has finally been broken, and the boy asks what's inside. He replies that he's going to take it out now. When he takes it out, it's a silver bracelet, and he says that it looks like any simple bracelet you can buy on the street. He thought there was something special about the material, but he doesn't feel anything coming from it. He then says that, since it only reacted with his magic, he probably needed to test it. Denny then puts the bracelet on, and it starts to glow. The old man said it was reacting as expected, and Denny said he was starting to see some strange things in it, and asked him if he knew what they were. The man then ends up being very impressed by it, saying that those characters are actually ancient runes that no one in this world can read, and are the characters that the ancient kingdom of Arshan used. Denny says he heard Arabella talk about it when he was young. She said it was an era when every little thing originated from magic, but one day that era suddenly ended, and the only things left from that time are relics and stories from the past. Face to face now, this single line of magical code. The man then says that he knew his magic was special, but he had no idea that it was related to the ancient kingdom of magic. Denny then says that this must be why he's been able to move around the forest so easily over the last few days. And the man says that it seems to be the case, since the magic in that forest originated from Arcana, which is actually known as Arcana. He then thinks that he always wanted that kind of boy as his disciple. Denny then says that he doesn't see anything else on that bracelet anyway, and the old man says that he can take as long as he likes to figure it out. However, he wasn't supposed to go around talking about it. Suddenly, however, they hear a very loud sound, which surprises comprises them both. Guys, unfortunately there are no more chapters of this work, but if you want me to bring you the sequel as soon as possible, when I release more chapters, just leave lots of likes here and lots of comments asking for part 2. Remember that members can watch the videos without any ads. But that's it. Thank you very much for watching me so far. Until the next video, and thanks.